Good morning and a warm welcome once again to today's webinar. My name is Brenda. I'm the Strategic Relationship Officer at the British Chamber of Commerce. I'd like to welcome all our members joining in. We have a really interesting topic today by our esteemed members, Primario, law firm based in South Africa, and some of the partners are here to really deduce some of the key matters that are affecting businesses today. Without further ado, I'll hand it over to Lawes.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Brenda. A warm welcome to all our participants this morning. My name is Lewis Donga. I'm an associate at FMC Advocates, Primario's local office here in Kenya. And today I'm joined by two of my colleagues. First is Fidel Mwaki, who is the managing partner of FMC Advocates, again, Primario's local office in Kenya, and Andreas Targard, who is a partner at Primario International. Today's topic of discussion will be mainly on how do we leverage foreign direct investments using public-private partnerships. And today we really just want to have an open and candid conversation and just discuss, having seen from an African perspective so many foreign investors who wish to come into the country and they wish to invest in the country, and they're asking what kind of models are present for them to invest in the country. It's a very key conversation to have to understand what are some of the options that are available to foreign investors to invest within the African market, and vis-a-vis or in the same way looking at as an African country or as people who would be accepting certain kinds of investment, what kind of considerations or options would we be looking at? What are the risks involved and how is the same being mitigated? To start off, I will give just a very general overview of the legal regime in Kenya and any key statistics within Africa. And then after that, we will now get into a conversation with Fidel and Andres, just to now understand how do we get into the nitty-gritties. I mean, we can always discuss the law as long as we want, but we now need to go to the practicalities and have conversations on actually the things that affect and influence public-private partnerships, and how best can we actually either have these considerations in place from a practical perspective. In Kenya, we do have the Public-Private Partnerships Act that was enacted quite recently in 2021. And the intention of this law was really to provide specific legal provisions with respect to public-private partnerships. It came in place as a means of now regulating how best public and private partnerships, public-private partnerships should actually be taken through. And it does give some very key provisions that I feel we would need to be understood prior to us even having the conversation. There are certain terminologies, there are certain definitions and certain provisions that we feel are important to keep in mind. And really, when we look at what a public-private partnership is considered, or a PPP, we'll just call them PPPs. And you'll find that in the first instance is where you have a private party uses a contracting authority, and a contracting authority could be, at least from a Kenyan perspective, is either the national government or a county government, where these two entities come together and where the private entity first and foremost agrees to provide a public service or to provide a certain public function on behalf of the contracting authority. And in most instances, you find that they do this perhaps to take, let me say, a public body may have, and gives this function or gives this service on behalf of this public body. Secondly, is that this kind of partnership, of course, does require some form of compensation. And this compensation is usually twofold. You'll find in certain scenarios that it's either there is compensation being paid up as fees being given out from a public fund or from the treasury, where it's a one-off or a staggered kind of payment that's made to the private party as part of their compensation for the services that they are giving. An alternative, and I'd say quite common form of compensation, is with respect to if there's any means of collection of fees from the use or from the utilization of this facility or the infrastructure that's in place that's being managed or operated by the private party. You'll find in majority of, as seen from a Kenyan perspective, majority of the PPPs that we have. And if you look at, for example, give a case study with the Nairobi Expressway, was one of the the PPPs that actually caused quite a conversation in the country, where the Kenya National Highways Authority, together with the Chinese Road and Bridge Construction, I think it's corporation, came together to now actually have a public-private partnership to construct the Nairobi Expressway. And it's again the means of compensation that is being provided there is this is actually a toll road, and therefore payments that are being made. The road is being managed by Moja Expressway on behalf of the Chinese Road Bridge Construction Corporation. And these payments that are being made from the tolls then go towards settling the compensation for the kind of services that we got from the private party. Other instances may have a hybrid system where you have compensation being paid two ways. Of course, the one-off payments being made from a public fund, and then again, partially also being settled through collection of any fees or charges from the use or the utilization or the operation of that specific infrastructure. Another key conversion is on liability. Again, with the kind of PPPs that we have, it's really a contracting authority, the national government, the county government, releasing and giving authority to a private party to actually take certain measures and give certain services on behalf or really in the stead of the public body. And that immediately then means that when we talk about liability and risk, legally within a Kenyan perspective, that liability passes to the private party, and they are meant to make sure that they mitigate against any liabilities. And in case anything happens, either at the point of design, the building, or the construction, the maintenance, then the liability would fall under the private party itself. Finally, is the aspect of transfer. So again, with PPPs, the intention is never to have a private party completely taking over government functions. It's not the intention that a private party will at all times throughout eternity take up the functions of a public authority. So the usual system is that at the very end, once the terms of the PPP have been fulfilled, then the facility or the service is transferred back to the contracting authority, be it the national government or the county government. And these four really form what we would call the basis or the characteristics of a PPP. And you now come to realize and come to see that there are actually specific entities involved. The parties are national county governments together with private parties. It's usually for the performance of public function or to actually give a public service in the stead of a public body. You find that there's, of course, needs some form of compensation, and this depends on how the parties do agree whether it's going to be paid up front or it's going to be some form of collection of fees and charges as the facility is being managed or operated. Again, liability falls within the private party, so the private party has to be very clear. And for foreign investors, it needs to be very clear that if anything happens, any risk that is present within the design, construction, or maintenance of PPP, then in that instance, you find that the liability would fall to the private party. Finally, is the aspect of transfer. There is no specific situation where a private party will 100% at all times eternally take up the function of public body, and that's what we would really call as characteristics of PPPs. Another key term that needs to be in your minds is on project agreements. Sorry. So again, once a private party and a contracting authority come in, they would of course enter into a project agreement that specifies the terms of how exactly they wish for this PPP to be done, provides terms on financing, on operations, on building. How do these terms all come in, and they're normally collated together through the project agreement. We will discuss further with respect to the risks that are present, general mitigation measures that can be formed. But project agreements are very key documentations as they specify exactly what are the terms of the PPP and how should this PPP operate, at least from the point of its inception all the way till it's completed. PPPs also work within a specific time frame. Again, like you said, there is a concept of transfer. So that means that they cannot operate in eternity. So they are limited in time, and the maximum time period given within Kenyan law is a 30-year period. There are other forms of PPPs that are specific towards 5 years, 10 years, but the maximum for all the PPP arrangements that we have in Kenyan law is 30 years. So there is also this provision that has now come up following the enactment of the law, at least from 2021, which is now involving public procurement. As part of the requirements of PPPs as they are operating, especially for PPPs that are operating either fully through public funding or partially through public funding, then it requires that the provisions of an act that's called the Public Procurement and Asset Disposal Act apply, particularly with respect to tendering, the open tendering process. And this came in as really a way to kind of make it a bit more transparent for entities and private parties that are coming in to support at least local countries. And with respect to the investment, then there needs to be some form of transparency, and that's why you find the provisions of that law will really just come in to specify that if you want to tender, then there is an open tendering process, accepting of bids, and this entire process needs to be as transparent, as possible. So I think we will go towards the kind of types of arrangements that are present, kind of PPPs that are there. And then we can now move towards now the conversation with Fidel and Andres, just to now look at the nitty-gritties. How do we then really now, having gotten a really good background, gotten a really good foundation, how do we proceed? We do have various types of PPP arrangements that are present, recognized within Kenyan law. And the first one is what we call a build, own, operate, and transfer, or BOOT. And so the BOOT operates where a private party would design, construct, would own, operate, and operate the facility or the infrastructure that's being constructed as part of the PPP terms. And once the period lapses, which we've said again is a maximum period of 30 years, then they would transfer this facility back to the contracting authority. And in these situations, you find the PPP is involved from the onset to understand what exactly do we need to do to construct this particular. Let's again use the expressway for as an example. From the point of the inception of the project, the Chinese Road and Bridge Construction Corporation was present to do their design, to construct it, to own it for that particular point in time. And then once the 30 years lapse, then to return the property or return the facility back to, in this case, KENHA, the Kenya National Highways Authority. We do have another form that's known as the build, operate, and transfer. So in this specific instance, so the difference between the BOT and the BOOT is that there is no aspect of ownership. The ownership is retained by the contracting authority. However, the private party will design, they will construct, they will finance, and they will operate it. And then again, once the 30-year term period lapses, then the same is transferred back to the contracting authority. We do have build, own, and operate as one of the forms that's also recognized, where in this specific instance, you find that the PPP will design, will build, will finance, will construct, and will operate the entire, facility throughout the term of the PPP. This was, I think, it's a very key part to consider because the law does actually acknowledge that there should be an aspect of transfer, but then again, it also gives a form of a PPP arrangement that doesn't really recognize transfer of the facility. And again, I think we're still looking forward to at least this being expounded a bit better with certain guidelines from the PPP directorate, and I'll get to who the directorate is in a bit. We do have the build and transfer. So for the build and transfer, it's really more of having the private party is just involved in making sure that the facility is in place. So the design aspect and the construction and financing the construction, that's all the PPP's role is limited to. Once that is completed, then they just need to transfer this facility back to the contracting authority, and the contracting authority takes over the operations, takes over the maintenance and the management of the facility. There are others such as joint ventures. So a joint venture kind of structure is also recognized as a PPP. And a joint venture is basically a structure where the contracting authority would give public assets, such as, let's use land for this circumstance. And then the private party would come in to have, if it's financing, to give financing for the project. And there would now be specific terms on how the benefits would be distributed, how the compensation would be done. And this really just comes in where the government has a certain assets to provide, and of course the private party has financing to provide, and then they will easily manage to actually construct the project, construct the facility, and manage to finalize on it properly. There is management as well, where you find the facility is present, everything is already there. However, they just need somebody to come in and manage this and try pick up perhaps something that's lagging, it's not doing as well as it should. You find the private party comes in with a certain level of expertise in management of that specific sector and says that we will upskill this facility. So the regulators in the space, it's twofold. So it's the PPP committee that's set up under the Act. That's really the main governing body overseeing approving all PPP proposals and bids that are present, giving guidance and regulations within the space. And then there is the directorate, which is the technical body that now is giving more of an advisory or a guiding arm of the committee to just give guidance on coordinating on how PPP bids and proposals are being given to the committee, how these PPs are going to be structured, and also they also do come in negotiating some of these project agreements. So I think having seen and having really just gone through generally, given an overview generally of what the law provides and the key terms here, so that if you hear BOOT, then you're not quite surprised and you're not caught unawares. This is a very key conversation. I mean, 42 out of 54 countries in Africa have some form of PPP legal framework. So then I think the immediate question that begs, and now I would pose this to Fidel and Andreas, is why are PPPs really attractive to both foreign investors and to local countries? What attracts a foreign investor to decide to go for a PPP as opposed to any other form of foreign investment? So I don't know who would like to pick it up first. It's an open floor.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Andreas Stargard. Thanks for the introduction, Lewis. I will briefly speak, and then I'll let Fidel talk because I think he has the proper Kenyan perspective on things. I am, as you may gather from my accent, I'm based in Washington, D.C. Interesting day today for me here, as all eyes are on us, I guess, as to what will happen tonight. However, for now, I wanted to briefly discuss the topic of what can go wrong. I think, Lewis, your introduction highlighted the fact that there's a strong technical framework in place. We now have the 2021 Act, right, in Kenya in place, which has replaced the 2013 Act. And companies that wish to qualify and pre-qualify for PPP projects and generate foreign direct investment, which is why we're all here. The British Chamber of Commerce, of course, in large part represents foreign direct investment, either providers or seekers of or recipients of foreign direct investment, either by merger and acquisition or by a potential venture together with the state or even at the county level, right? Because PPPs can also be undertaken at smaller state levels. That said, a strong regulatory environment also requires, besides having the statute in place and the law ratified, also requires functioning and effective and efficient regulatory bodies. And that's where I just want to perhaps start the discussion somewhat unconventionally by discussing what can go wrong. Just when you go on the Directorate's website, the PPP unit as it's called, I like that term. The PPP unit's website, .go.ke, was broken as of last night. It is back up now, happily. On the publications page for the Kenyan government's Public-Private Partnership Directorate unit, it is missing literally all content, right? It's a WordPress site that says your content goes here. This is on the main page as soon as you click on publications. Those are inauspicious beginnings when you think about this, right? BCCK membership that considers finding out about PPPs or the framework might be disheartened to see that the regulatory body overseeing these projects, or supposedly overseeing the implementation of these projects and the compliance with the law, it hasn't got its act together when it comes to the website. And they may have to resort to either abandoning participating or finding competent legal counsel, private legal counsel, to navigate what should otherwise be an easy, open, and accessible issue, namely websites in today's economy, especially when you think about the sort of Silicon Valley of the East, which is a nice moniker that Nairobi and Kenya as a whole have managed to attain. Right, Kenya is known for its generally very advanced electronic infrastructure and its mobile money, etc. So it keeps going. By the way, I'm not done yet. Publications page is missing all content. Your content goes here. The investors info, something that the BCCK members might be interested in, right, still has as its most up-to-date document the 2019 investor report. All right, 5 years late, folks. The multimedia page has broken links. This page cannot be found for a current list of PPP projects. The mandate and functions page of the PPP Directorate still refers to the 2013 Act, which has been repealed and replaced by the 2021 Act, if I'm not mistaken. I'm looking at the enacted law right here. And finally, the link to the Directorate's Twitter or X account refers the reader to a non-existent account at KE_PPP official. It says this account does not exist. I have rarely in my practice as an attorney seen so many broken things on a government regulatory body website, right? So starting us off on this somewhat negative note, I want to hand it over to Fidel, who can hopefully give us a more positive view. As you may see, dear guests, we're starting this off sort of with a good cop, bad cop show here. But what would make a foreign direct investment a provider want to participate in a public-private partnership, regardless of the modality that Louis kindly laid out, whether it's a BOOT, a BOT, a route, or otherwise, a bot, no pun intended? What would make a provider of foreign direct investment want to invest in a PPP in Kenya when the regulatory landscape looks less than auspicious, at least at first glance? Of course, this is very, very superficial, what I'm talking about. What do you think, Fidel?
Thanks, Andreas. You've started off on a very interesting note. I think obviously looking out from outside of Kenya and looking in, it can seem as if the the access to PPPs is a challenge, simply because you go on the website and you can't really see what your path would be. But I think anyone who's done business in Africa, and Andreas, you probably have this experience, would realize that relationships are important, and personal relationships really make things move faster. So as much as you may find it a challenge to access a PPP framework through online means, I mean, if you come down to Kenya, come to speak to the relevant people at the Treasury or whoever you're dealing with, whichever county you're dealing with, you will find that a lot of people are open to opportunities. And I think my introductory remarks really would be on opportunities. I think Africa in general and in Kenya specifically, there are opportunities for investment through PPPs. I think our legal framework in the last, let's say, 15 years has really developed when you look at the current act now, it's a very robust system. It has a very robust framework. It has different options for how you can, access PPP projects. We've already spoke about, the different forms. I think one of the ones that we're seeing now in the press is the private initiated proposals, where somebody comes in and makes an offer or a proposal to the government, and we've seen it with the JKI, which is it's been well reported and currently in court, but it's been well reported. Other options include direct procurement, restricted tendering, open tendering system. So there's a lot of opportunities in the sense that the legal framework provides different ways in which you can access or do PPP projects. Again, the opportunities to invest are in critical sectors that need that kind of investment. So if you look at real estate is one critical sector, especially in affordable housing, in student housing. We're seeing a lot of interest, not just locally, but internationally as well, from investors looking to invest in these sectors. Transport is, of course, a major area open for investment. So there are with the roads, the rail, with our ports as well, and of course energy. So the opportunities are there. They require a lot of these areas require investment in infrastructure, investment in terms of rehabilitation, and there from there, there can arise opportunities to make some financial gains. So I think Lewis mentioned the expressway as being one. I mean, for some of us who live in Nairobi, the expressway when it started looked like this big behemoth that not everyone was very keen on. It was disrupting travel. It was disrupting traffic all over Nairobi. It was being built across a major transport network. We were used to a certain way of moving from work to business to offices to meetings. But the expressway, we were not very convinced that it would offer, a solution that would actually help reduce cost of business, help ease cost of transportation across the city. 2 years after it has been, in operation, I mean, I use the expressway not very frequently, but when I need to get across town, it's 10 minutes, 5 minutes. I mean, that is fantastic. So there are opportunities even for a foreign investor in terms of bridging that gap, bringing in investment, bringing in opportunities, and also making some financial gain through the tolls, through the end user payments. So that is another area. I think one final area which I think is very important in terms of the opportunities is we have such a huge labor market with skilled, unskilled contractors and workers that can very easily support PPP projects. So even in terms of infrastructure development, in terms of real estate development, there's so much expertise in Kenya and within Africa, I believe, to help support such engagement. So Andreas, I think I'll give the optimistic view. I don't know whether you have anything to add to that.
Before I let our moderator Louis Ndonga jump in, I will counter again. I'm just wearing a hat here, the Advocatus Diaboli hat, the devil's advocate hat. I will counter with again just something from the very recent past. Two examples, both involving this firm named Adani, after an Indian billionaire, right? Adani, the company had proposed to enter into what could be deemed two, I believe, separate PPPs in Kenya, after having engaged in many other similar projects across the hemisphere. Bangladesh is an example. We can talk about that, what just happened there yesterday. They extracted over $150 million from the Bangladeshi government, which owed it allegedly $800 million. So there's some pressure there after they throttled energy delivery by 50%, right? As the partner in private partnership. So the two projects that many of you may be well aware of are the Jomo Kenyatta Airport expansion for the next 30 years, which, as Louis pointed out, is the maximum, and renovation, as well as energy infrastructure, similar to the Bangladesh project. And both of those, here comes the critical view, or perhaps the doubtful view. Both of those projects are on hold. One of them had been approved, right? The electricity project, I believe, but has now been put on hold by judicial interference by a court due to claims by parties that it was violating the rules, and that's almost $1 billion. That's, I think, $750 million in terms of its worth. And the airport deal is now being challenged as well by the Law Society of Kenya and by the Human Rights Commission, saying that it's unaffordable, is threatening job losses. Speaking of Kenyan manpower and woman power, and that it was a financial and fiscal risk and is not offering the taxpayer value for money. So both of those big ticket items are on hold. And if we do look at the example of what Adani has just done in Bangladesh, it's the same thing. However, perhaps a few years into it, so maybe Kenya can learn from the experience that their Bangladeshi counterparts are currently going through. The Bangladeshi Energy Board literally bore all the risk, had to pay between 20 or 25 and 60% inflated rates. It was a terrible deal. This goes towards, we can discuss this later if Lewis wants us to touch on this. This goes to the point of having to capacity build for the African continent's governments, right? That the government is often, the public aspect in the PPP, the first P that it stands for, is often at a disadvantage in terms of experience and capacity, right? When the private, a billionaire company comes in and has, the top-notch lawyers, the top-notch engineers, the top-notch accountants, etc., the government is often at a disadvantage in terms of capacity and is being essentially at risk, put at risk for of being taken advantage of. So those were issues there, and then Adani throttled by 50% the energy delivery, essentially holding them hostage. Right, that's a risk. So of course we don't want this to happen here. Perhaps it's not a bad thing that this has been put on hold for at least a little bit. But what's the alternative? The alternative is long lines at Jomo Kenyatta Airport, which we've all experienced, those of us who've flown in or out of Nairobi. Things that are falling apart. Is that better? I don't know. Probably not. But when you look at the experience of other countries that are currently being taken advantage of in these PPPs, it certainly puts a damper on things. I won't even get into the concept of the Road and Belt Initiative of the Chinese government, essentially planning for, an expansion of a somewhat novel quasi-economic colonial power, right? That some people allege. I'm not saying that. I'm simply quoting criticisms. So the question is, do you really want to fall into a trap, right? So for that purpose, and I'll stop the risk factor listing here, and I'll get into the positive upside of things. I think to that effect, the capacity building has to be accelerated, I believe, so that African governments, including the Kenyan government, cannot be taken advantage of by the usually foreign private parties that form the second P of the PPP project. And in order to accomplish that capacity building, entities like the African Development Bank, right, have established things such as the African Legal Support Facility, the ALSF, which has a functioning website. It's very interesting. If anybody's interested, it's www.alsf.int. Very useful content, and they provide for their members, which are either project leaders or governments and their institutions, they provide they provide courses and capacity building programs for those entities, which I think is highly advisable. We, as of course a law firm, are also involved in similar concepts, however, on a direct one-on-one basis, not with multiple governments, just with specific private parties that are interested in bringing investment to the continent and specifically to East Africa, specifically to Kenya and the other countries where we're active. But the ALSF is certainly a good starting point for those who wish to get more familiar with PPPs.
I think from what I'm getting from the conversation by the both of you is that there clearly seems that while we do have a very clear legal, technical framework that's in place, quite carefully thought out, quite recent as well, so that it can capture for any recent, any additional or new or novel inventions that may come in that may perhaps work well with respect to PPPs. It still does not mean that, at least from a practical perspective, it will always operate. And I think with Andres, the example that you're giving and what you're highlighting is that we do have a very good legal framework that's in place. And unfortunately, so many African countries are guilty of this, where you have a very good legal, technical framework in place. You took the best minds who sat down and came up with proper policies, proper laws. But then again, the inverse of that is that you require a certain level of economic stability, you require a certain level of political stability, a certain level of accountability for the law to actually work. And in that kind of instance, you find situations where I've seen the Bangladesh example, and it's basically a situation where for lack of a better term, one billionaire can just determine how to cut power in an entire country, or how electricity exports are being done in one entire country. And those are the kind of things that now would need to be negotiated through having a proper. For example, in Kenya, the PPP directorate is meant to actually make sure that they negotiate the project agreements in a manner that is beneficial to the country. And you'll find even with the law has a requirement of local content, which basically means that in any PPP project, there has to be some form of benefit, other than, of course, the services being provided and the facilities being constructed. There is a benefit that needs to be given to the locals. If it's either by getting services from Kenyan locals, or if it's involving Kenyan locals in construction, or if it's getting Kenyan manufactured goods, or a situation of technology transfer. And I think technology transfer is one of the things that could come up and become a very, very, very important part of making sure that as a continent, we managed to upskill ourselves and actually manage to do certain things to the best, to an equal or better position than the foreign investors that we are looking for. I feel like we have touched on this a bit, but Andres has really looked at the risks. But I mean, in your view, I think Fidel, maybe you can go fast on how are some of these risks, or if there's any additional risks you feel that are present, how can we work around them? How can we mitigate against them? How can we make sure that at least looking at speaking, depending on both sides, depending on which side, I'll make it open to you if you want to represent a private party, the contracting authority, but how do you feel we need to mitigate against the very present risks that Andreas has so rightly put out?
Yeah, thanks, Lewis. I think I probably want to look at it from the aspect of an end user who is looking in and hoping to benefit from a PPP that has been entered into between a contracting party and a foreign investor. We've seen a lot of activism recently in Kenya, particularly, especially when it comes to public affairs. We've seen recently, we've had a lot of demonstrations in Kenya because of the finance bill. We actually had the bill withdrawn because of public public demonstrations, not participation as such. But I think it paints a picture that public participation is something that foreign investors cannot ignore. The views of stakeholders, and stakeholders include not just employees affected, say, at JKIA, the employees at the airport, but people who actually use the facilities, like me or Andreas, who is trying to get out of Kenya and spending an hour at the check-in, how does this deal work for the benefit of an end user like us, like any of us? So that aspect of public participation, I think, needs to be is a significant risk factor, is a significant issue that anybody looking to invest in PPPs in Kenya needs to consider, needs to take account of, needs to ensure that the contracting party has a framework for ensuring that public participation and stakeholder engagement occur throughout the process, whether at inception or throughout, whenever as it may be required. We've seen also, particularly with projects which concern land transactions and require access to land or land to be compulsorily acquired by the state for certain public projects. Again, these are complex issues in Kenya, and I'm sure in Africa. Land is obviously a very, very emotive issue, very sensitive in many cases. A lot of land is ancestral land, historical land. It involves decisions by not just a landowner, but their family members. So those are things that, as an investor coming into Kenya to do a PPP, those are things that are important to consider. And also, I think, we all understand the problems we have with corruption and bribery and so on and so forth in Africa in general and in Kenya. Those are also other risk factors that need to be considered, because they can undermine the value, the quality, the integrity of your PPP arrangement. So, looking into those aspects is equally important. I think having that, having a strong political foundation in terms of political stability is critical. So even in Kenya, I think since 2010, we've had generally peaceful elections, without too much, political issues. So the stability of the country is much better than it was, say, pre-2010. So, and I think across the countries that are doing well in Africa, where there is a lot of PPP activity, you'll find as well the political stability is much better. So this is essential, I think, to ensure that the PPP projects actually go forth and are able to be sustainable, especially considering they are long-term projects, and such projects are going to go over the course of different, governments, the lifetimes of different governments. So that I think is something that is important to consider.
I think, Fidel, if you manage to spend an hour or less at JKIA, that means you were flying private or have some sort of magical platinum membership in some express line. Okay. Well, I have never spent less than, I think, 2 hours in that entrance, once I even get into it. So I can I am all in favor of any partnership, whether it be public-private with foreign direct investment, or with one of the leading families and capital holders in Kenya to renovate that airport. But on a more serious note, I think what you just touched on, and I know we have, just looking at the list of our current audience members, we do have many folks from Kenya here in the audience. They know better than I do that, of course, the risks that you just identified, namely political upheaval, public protest, equality issues, societal issues. When you think about 6 or 8 families controlling apparently a large majority of the GDP, then the concept of a public-private partnership, right, that benefits the public and really the country as a whole, whether it's through an expressway, an airport, or other things, and not individual interests only, which would normally be in a capitalistic economy, which would normally accrue to really just a few, so to speak, really does, to me, represent an opportunity. Right, so it's an opportunity for the government to fulfill its promise of being in a democracy, being the arbiter and the regulator for the masses. So if the government allows a public-private partnership to move forward, enhances the conditions for that to happen, and manages to bring in the foreign investment into the country for the benefit of the masses, I think that is overall certainly if not from a legal, then certainly from a moral and ethical perspective, is a plus. I think the dangers, as we have listed them here, are that the foreign investors may just be as unreliable as a domestic investor. The problem then becomes where is the money coming from? So if we do our due diligence, and if we do have the capacity building, and we do vet these foreign direct investment sources, and we ensure that the actual modality that Louis mentioned earlier, and the actual profit share, if there is a profit, not every project has to generate profit when it is in the public interest, but of course, foreign direct investment won't come without a promise of at least some profit, then we can perhaps see positive outcomes. I think this implies that good governance, right? Good governance and deal management preparation are keys for a successful PPP experience. This starts with even before the tender, right? It starts with vetting the project. Even before you vet the foreign direct investor, you vet the project. You have a feasibility study, which I think is your law is actually addresses these things, right? So you have to have a feasibility study. Does this even make sense? Is this even possible? With objective experts conducting the same. Then you vet the potential bidders in the tender. You ensure an open and fair competition, right? Which is a little bit my expertise as a competition lawyer, antitrust. You require oversight over the private parties' home affairs, right? By definition, when we have foreign direct investment, the party doing the investment is not subject to the same regulatory oversight mechanisms that it is in its home country, in its home jurisdiction. You know, if I'm a foreign investor, let's say I'm Adani, I'm just picking them at random here because they're apropos given the recent news. If I'm Adani, you know, the Indian government has more legal oversight ability over that company than the Kenyan government by its very nature, because the firm is incorporated and has done historic business in that other nation. You, as the host country, have less oversight, at least a priori. Proper implementation of the PPP Act of 2021 can potentially change that, right? Where you get access, by you, I mean the Kenyan government, the directorate, gets access to the books, gets access to, you know, comparative rates that it might charge elsewhere in its home jurisdiction and the like. So that's, again, it's this information asymmetry that I was talking about earlier, where oftentimes governments are at a disadvantage compared to the foreign direct investment private party, right? That latter has an asymmetrical benefit of having perhaps better experts, more knowledge about its own costs, et cetera, et cetera. So getting access to the books is important, and not just books, other dealings as well. And then, of course, having us three here on the panel as lawyers, we haven't even touched on this yet, right? Having an ironclad dispute resolution clause as well. And again, I don't know what our audience members are doing in terms of their interest in what we should discuss here, but if they are attorneys, they might be interested in what can be done there. There's international arbitration that's appealing, because of course the local courts might side with the local government. That's a concern for foreign direct investment, right? So international mediation or arbitration are options there. Ensuring anti-bribery and corruption best practices. Of course, you touched on this, Fidel, and again, it's something that we at Primerio do, and we advise on that. Requiring, I think, I think is important, requiring transparency in risk tolerance, right? You as the private party, as the BCCK member, you may wish to disclose your risk tolerance to your partner, be it a county level project or a sort of federal, Kenyan, Kenya-wide, country-wide project. You may wish to disclose your risk tolerance to really have a frank discussion at the outset. It's much better than rather than having a failed project at the end. Case in point, these various Adani projects, which are now held up by the High Court, or not generating as much money or successful energy delivery or infrastructure delivery as would have been planned. So transparency of risk tolerance. And then finally, there are these things called stabilization clauses, right? Where if something goes south a little bit, the government is usually required, or one party, usually the government is required to chip in to aid in bolstering the project. That can have also, as well, the sort of moral hazard effect, right? The other party may not fulfill its end of the bargain when it knows that my counterparty will have to essentially balance out my own failures. It's sort of like curve grading, at school. So all these things are well known by now, right? Public-private partnerships have been in existence for decades. And since we know those risks, I think we can manage them, parties can manage them, and with the right counsel, whether it is the ALSF of the African Development Bank, whether it is private counsel, or whether it is simply experts in trade law, etc., can manage and anticipate those risks.
It's pretty comprehensive, covering really how much the risks are definitely quite present. And I think when we were discussing the question of bribery and claims of situations where there's extortion, reminded me of the tattoo. I don't know if Fidel had seen this, the tattoo investors who called out the local county governments and basically saying that the local county government is requesting for certain billions of Kenya shillings so that we can actually continue with our investment. And such whistleblowing again as well, I think, with foreign investors who definitely know that they're here in the country for a particular purpose and they're not here to wrongfully gain from the PPP that they have put in place. I think that's caused quite a big stir in the country, where a foreign investor will blatantly or in a public platform during a press conference say that this and this individual were trying to extort XYZ amount of money from us. So I think, looking at the time, perhaps I'd like to open the floor first to, sorry, Andres, you look like you have something to add.
No, sorry. Go ahead.
No, okay, great. So I think I'll just open the floor to anyone who feels they have questions that they'd like us to our panel to address. And then after that, I think once the same is addressed, we can close the forum. So anyone who feel free either to write it on the chat or raise your hand, and you have an opportunity to speak to the panel and ask your questions.
I'm good. I'm Josiah Bwana from I&M Bank. I've somehow had a bit of exposure to these PPPs, and I like the contributions from yourself, Andreas, and Fidel. Considering that Kenya, like any other African countries, we are considering PPPs as the option available for infrastructure, where most of the private partners who are coming with their funds for whichever form of the PPP, they are more controlled from their host countries, as rightly put by Andreas, than we could control them from this end. Then how do we protect the public on such projects, either in terms of performance or other future commitments, and other risks, which would include any risk in the host countries, which would affect the implementing private party. So are we ready? Was that envisaged in our laws? Is it covered? And such kind of things. Thank you.
Josiah, I think it's a great question. In principle, I do not. Let me be very clear here, and maybe this comes as a disappointment. I'm not an expert. I'm not a local lawyer. Our colleagues are, I am not a local Kenyan lawyer. I'm somewhat of a Pan-African competition law expert. So my expertise lies a little bit outside the specific legal framework, especially the latest act, the 2021 PPP Act of Kenya. However, I can say this: nothing prevents a contracting party, as a matter of freedom to contract basic principles, right, to demand certain elements in a contract. You know, you have the consideration flowing both ways, whether it is money for an ice cream cone or whether it is the title to land in return for cash you get from a mortgage. Or in this particular case, Josiah, you could be the government of Kenya, you could be the PPP directorate, and demand, regardless of what is actually already established by the statutory framework of the Act and its affiliate regulations and guidelines, you can demand X, Y, and Z in order to contract with another party, right? That is the beauty of freedom to contract. A contract is essentially two parties or multiple parties making their own mini law. That's the beauty of a contract. Now, in that contract, the government certainly has the ability to specify that it wants access to, and then you can fill in the blanks. You're a banker, you know what documents you need. You could get advice. If you don't know, you can get advice as to what documents would be relevant, whether they are, you know, their home country's books, whether there are other elements regarding their own costs and profits elsewhere. And that's something that I personally would strongly advise anyone who comes to us to put in there, if I were advising the government, that is. If I were advising the private side, I mean, by definition, I hate to say it, I would try to limit disclosure, right? I'm just being honest here, because it's just it doesn't help the private company to give away its secrets, whether it's financial secrets or otherwise. So that's just a sad reality. That said, Josiah, there's of course long-term. You know, these public-private partnerships, as Louis mentioned and Fidel as well, they're not short-term. They're usually medium to long-term, maximum of 30 years by law. However, even that maximum can effectively be surpassed, right, by virtue of the fact that large companies that do foreign direct investment and that do engage in PPPs try to develop relationships with their host jurisdiction over those years. And they try not to do just one, but multiple. I mean, case in point, Adani is doing two, right? Or more than two, but the energy and the airport, possibly others. So when that happens, there's a benefit, Josiah, of the host nation becoming more knowledgeable about their counterpart because there's history there. It's just like knowing a good friend. You know what they're going to do. You know how they react. You know what their issues are. Same thing with long-term dealings between two contract parties. But of course, as an antitrust and competition expert, I'm also worried about that because it then essentially could potentially lead to state authorized monopolies, right? To entities that really have entrenched dominant positions in the host nation, whether they're foreign or not, doesn't even matter. It could be a domestic PPP partner. Let's just be clear here. Of course, we're here under the auspices and at the invitation of the BCCK, but it doesn't have to be a UK company that is the PPP partner. It doesn't have to be an Indian company. It could, in theory, be a Kenyan completely domestic entity. So regardless, the worry about monopoly creation arising out of long-term, multiple, perhaps parallel infrastructure projects or other PPPs is certainly a worry that I, as an antitrust lawyer, do have.
Perhaps if you can indulge me for just one final last question. Kenya as a country, we have a strange way of developing our laws, regulations, and the rest. And then we are also considered, we don't have precedents on the PPPs. Probably we are on the PPP Act 2021 was more of a fishing expedition, imagining of situations. Usually in Kenya, what we do is we tend to develop stronger and much more protective laws and regulations post-event. You give an example of Adani, and the interest they've shown in multiple massive sensitive infrastructure project. Then I would say probably this is an opportunity. Then for private sector and private legal firms to wish to be enjoined in whatever proceedings are happening in courts, not for the purpose of beating Adani to whatever they're chasing, but for the purpose of the courts pronouncing themselves on the gaps available, the visible gaps in our laws, such that then the matter is referred back either to Parliament to have stronger laws. Because if you don't do that, then and we end up signing such contracts long term, then as you said rightfully, we may end up having a continuing monopoly of essential services placed in a few hands, and then these PPPs will not deliver the public good sought. So this is just an assignment back to Lewis and Fidel and their friends in the LSK to wish to be enjoined, so as we can end up with a better act on the same.
Yeah, I do agree with you. Unfortunately, and I don't think this is maybe a Kenyan problem. I think it's just a general problem. Again, if you find certain gaps that you perhaps were not aware of, it leads to the law being enacted post something happening. A very general example is the United Nations was generally a result of the Second World War. So, and that's the unfortunate situation. But again, I do agree that the intention at all times with PPPs is not to seem as if we are beating a foreign investor. It's more towards actually achieving a mutually beneficial goal. And the law is actually quite good in my view. I think it's been quite well thought out. Its implementation is what now I feel we need to work on. Part of even the security, it's part of kind of the measures that are in place to kind of secure the nation includes having the directorate in place came in with the 2021 Act. It wasn't there before, and it just came in as the technical body to now come in and give the proper expertise with respect to PPPs and make sure that the committee is well informed, is well guided and advised, and also come in even when it's needed to negotiate these the project arrangements. Then it has to be there to negotiate and say, for example, our law requires a local content requirement that you need to get people from Kenya, you need to use goods from Kenya, services from Kenya, and then that must be complied with. If you're even looking at going even as far as enforcing anti-money laundering laws to make sure any finances used within the funding of this project is not the proceeds of crime. And this is now, it's an international concept with the Financial Action Task Force. But I do agree with you, as lawyers, we do have a role to make sure that we do ideally protect society. I don't know if Fidel, you have anything you'd like to add before we can.
Yeah, just briefly, I think, and I think Andreas mentioned it. So when Kenya is sourcing for partners to do PPP projects, I'm sure we're looking at guys or companies which are very experienced in these projects, which have the necessary background, capabilities. I don't think we are, for example, like the Chinese companies, we've been doing PPPs with them for some time now. So we're kind of used to how they work. These agreements, they're very straight. I wouldn't say they're straightforward, but they are, they have certain clauses that are understood by these companies, and these companies who are experienced with them understand the DD requirements. They understand the process. They know what needs to be done. When it comes to like law reform, I think that is something that happens continuously. Lewis mentioned that aspect of the directive coming in the 2021 Act. Another aspect was allowing a county representative from the counties to be part of that committee, so that they are also represented when it comes to projects in the counties. So these are things that we're learning as we go along. I think we've learned them over the past 10 years. The case that's there, a lot of the issues that are being debated under that case include public participation issues. So maybe the court, when making a determination in that case, may make a determination on how public participation should be done when it comes to PPP projects. So I think it's good to just keep alive to what's happening. And it's good that the cases are there because they allow for interpretation, dissection of what the law is saying, and hopefully we improve the process as we go along.
Brenda, I think I'll allow Andreas, Fidel, just a parting shot from you, and then we can hand over back to the BCK.
Sure, let me start first. I think with PPPs, I think the law is in place now. That is a law that is quite clear. It opens up a lot of opportunities for investment in PPPs. So I think any foreign investor coming into Kenya, there are opportunities. Just get the proper legal advice from your lawyers. Speak to them, see what opportunities are there, how you can structure your developments, your investments in PPPs. A lot of considerations now in light of new developments, especially as I mentioned in terms of local content, in terms of public participation. These are things that are important to now consider, and we can't really avoid them going forward. But it's good to see a lot of good activity in the area, and we hope that it bears fruit going forward. Thank you for listening to us.
In the interest of time and following my partner Fidel, I echo his sentiment. I want to close with simply one sentence that says, I am not always wearing the hat that I wore at the outset. I hope you have seen this during the course of the webinar, that I am not always wearing the skeptic's hat, but I'm actually quite an optimist. However, I do believe that it behooves us as lawyers, you, the audience, as either also lawyers or potential investors or representatives of investors or recipients of foreign direct investment, any of the above, or government representatives, it behooves all of us to be A, interested, B, skeptical, and C, critical of the proposals that we receive, that we review, or that we may even create. Because I think ultimately there's lots to be said for not just relying on government, but really relying on the private drive to propose projects which under the law can actually also occur. But that's for another topic, for another topic for another seminar. And I thank the members who have stayed over time. Thanks to the BCCK and Brenda and her team for hosting and inviting us to speak on this subject, which apparently is of interest to the members. Happy to repeat it in the future.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you as well to Fidel and Andres for taking the time to walk with us, just go through this webinar discussion. Again, thank you to the BCCK for the opportunity to just speak, really just have a conversation on PPPs. As an African country, this is a very key conversation to have. And finally, to our audience, for your attentiveness, for your interest, we do thank you. So thank you so much.